Congratulations on the film. I really enjoyed it, and I kind of think people almost like underrate your sensibilities. Like you're willing to sort of make almost any movie. So I feel like when like
I don't know if that doesn't
no,
sound like a very good thing. He'll do anything.
no, yeah, give him a buck, he'll do anything. No, I think it's more just like you know, your style fits almost any story. Like as long as there's good characters, it's very easy to see you helming a movie. Like you know, on the surface, you know, this and The Last King of Scotland, State of Play, like they're similar, but they're so spread out in terms of what they're looking at. That character is kind of the only thing that combines them. So I have to imagine like when you read a script, you're looking at like characters you can invest in.
Yeah, characters I can invest in, and often characters that are a little morally ambiguous. I guess
Yeah.
that's what I find fascinating. I think that, for me, when people are just black and white, and we know who they are, we know they're heroic or whatever from the beginning. It's never that interesting, and so yeah, I think that's what characters in all of those films have got in common.
Oh yeah, like when you I mean, like looking for morally ambiguous characters makes a lot of sense because there are people who are presented as mostly bad, but then have an odd redeeming quality, or presented as good but have a seedy side. Like there's that. I think you play with that even more so here because you know the whole
Well, I
sort of
think so. Yeah, I mean, I think
yeah
that, obviously the central character Mohamedou, he. The reason I did the movie was because I talked to the real guy, and I found him so fascinating because he was such a mix of different characteristics, and not at all what I expected. It's slightly intimidating when somebody says, "Oh, do you want to get on a Skype call with a guy who is accused of being one of the perpetrators of 9/11 and
why not
all sorts of other things, and he's been in Guantanamo for 14 years. He's just got out. Do you want to talk
yeah
to him?" And you're like, yeah, I'd be fascinated to, but I'm a little nervous. So
yeah
I thought he would be a man who was angry and embittered and, hate everything about the West.
yeah
And instead, I get on Zoom, I get on Skype because Zoom didn't exist then, and and here's a guy who's funny, he's smiling, he's full of life, he's in love with American culture, he's seen my movies in Guantanamo Bay, he is singing Black Eyed Peas songs to me, and he speaks English like a 20-year-old, Marine from Arkansas,
mhm,
and he's just not what you expect. Um, and I really thought that here was an opportunity to do an incredibly rare thing in mainstream cinema, which is to have a fully human Muslim
yeah
leading character in a movie. It's not something that we've seen really at all. And here is somebody who I think is so intriguing, and ultimately I think is so inspiring for me anyway, that he can do that thing that I think other Muslim characters might find very difficult, was to enter into your heart a little bit.
yeah.
And obviously having Tahar Rahim to do that was a big bonus.
Oh, yeah. And he when I talked to him, we talked about that and how it is such a interesting character to play because you don't really see that character portrayed. It's very like you said, black and white is very much how that character is normally portrayed. And even in the film, because you're you know you're watching a true story and you're sort of inclined to either feel like he must be guilty, he must be innocent. You know, you have your preconceived notions. Then you guys will tinker with that by having different elements come into play. So you sort of wonder what you're am I projecting onto this character or are other people projecting? And that's something the characters even have to deal with within the film. So there's a
Exactly.
little
And
more
that's,
going
that's
on.
obviously my experience with
Yeah,
him, and I'm not a lawyer and I'm not God, so I don't know whether he's absolutely 100% innocent or guilty. All I know is that he spent 14 years in prison. The American government spent millions of dollars trying to find evidence against him, and they never found anything. They never were able to build any case at all. And I think his lawyer, Nancy Hollander, would say to you the same thing. She's not going to say he is 100% innocent. Um, but she would say, with all the things that have been leveled at him, all the things he's been through, and if you haven't found any evidence that he's done anything wrong, then yeah, he's
yeah,
probably innocent. He's 99.9999% innocent. And I think, in a way, that little tiny bit of ambiguity that still remains is kind of useful to the movie. And also, you know, in a way doesn't matter, because this
Yeah.
film is not about that. It's not about, in the end, his innocence or guilt. It's about what was done to him and the
Yeah.
treatment that he received, and the fact that we should all, I think, agree that the rule of law is a good thing, and that as soon as you throw out or bend or go around the rule of law, you end up breeding nightmares like Guantanamo.
And you mentioned it, and he mentioned it, so it was all in my mind watching just how like optimistic and hopeful this human being is, when I know I wouldn't be that way. I feel like I would be a bitter like fuck at this point if
Well,
someone took
exactly.
my
But I
thing
think the
away.
thing with Mohamedou is that it's not as though he's just like, oh, I'm a saint.
Yeah.
I think he feels those feelings of anger, hatred, vengeance, but he's made a conscious decision that every morning he gets up and he's like, I'm not going to let those things be my life and
Yeah.
be my perspective. I'm gonna think the best of people, and I'm going to look forward. I said to him, after I remember him telling me on his first call a lot of the details of what happened to him, and I was boiling with rage and anger,
Yeah.
because I was talking to this lovely human being and these terrible injustices that had happened to him. And I said, are you suing the American government? Are you getting compensation? And he laughed and he said, well, no, I don't want to do that, because that would just consume my life
Mm.
in regrets and anger, and you know what legal cases are like. They're going to last for 20
Yeah.
years, and maybe eventually I'll get some money. Is that going to make me feel any better? No. And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. So there's a little bit of a sort of Nelson Mandela kind of element to this guy in my head. But also there's always this ambiguity, because once somebody's received a phone call from Osama bin Laden's sat phone, you're like,
Yeah. You
uh,
keep interesting company.
you keep interesting company, but in the end, it's kind of like, well, so somebody, or you're associated with someone, does that make you a criminal? Does that make you
Yeah.
guilty of something? So all of these questions come
Oh yeah.
into play. But ultimately, the line in the movie that covers this issue is at the end when Jody says, my client is not a suspect, he's a witness.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the heart of it.
Oh yeah, and even earlier when she's first taking on the case, and it's I don't care, I care about the Constitution and civil rights. Like there's, you know, the system is meant for people to be defended if they're guilty. So even if he's guilty, there's still a system, and I think that's something you guys do well, because as you see the progression of it, especially towards like the back end of the film, where in a regular fictional movie you'd be ready for him to like get out. If they drop the case, everything will be fine, and that's when the interrogation starts. It's like, oh wait, this is how we handled it. So
Yeah.
it's just everything about it was different than you would expect, but also oddly felt right. Like, oh, that is what happens, and then leads to
Well, I
the
think real life doesn't conform to the genre tropes, and I think
no,
obviously we play with a genre a little bit in this. It's I want people to feel like, oh, is this going to be a thriller? Is this going to be a legal
no,
thriller? But actually it's not that. It becomes this kind of character study of this guy and the environment, an anthropological study almost of the environment that he's in Guantanamo. And so and the American characters likewise, there isn't like a bad guy. We all know about Bush and Cheney and what the decisions they made, but we also realize that they're human beings who have good and evil about them, like most people do. And they decided, like the CIA guy we meet briefly in the film, that they, that they were trying to do the right thing. They were trying to prevent another 9/11. They were trying to prevent another terror attack. So there is nobody. The Christian Republican character in this, played by Benedict, is a, another ambiguous character. He starts off with a bloodlust, and we understand why he has that, because he's lost a friend. His country has been attacked, and slowly he has to come to terms with the fact that, oh, actually we're doing something really wrong here, and it's his kind of integrity, his personal integrity, and his Christian values that stop him. And I think particularly today, people tend to associate evangelical Christianity or with kind of the right, and with kind of people who will ignore wrongdoing and are kind of harsh in their judgments and things. But for many people, obviously, Christianity is a great moral guidance.
Yeah, for sure. The news is, watching even, the last month, you're just like, okay, when I hear those words and I hear those specific triggers, I'm assuming the worst just because look around. But yeah, there's something about watching his character come to terms with, well, everything I know about my faith and my job and how I go about doing my job doesn't fit with what I should be doing here. And even Shailene's character, who very quickly like attaches to
Mm.
him and wants to, she wants him to be innocent. So you have three very different characters, and I'm just curious, when you cast this film, I'm sure obviously once you have to hear, you have your, the movie doesn't work without that role being filled properly.
No, exactly. And he was, I'd worked with him before. We remained friends,
Yeah.
and I knew as soon as I had that phone call, that Skype call with Mohamedou, I felt I want to make this film, and I know exactly who's going to play that role. It's Tahar. So I talked to him immediately about it, sent him the script as soon as we had the first draft, and he was like, "I'm in." And so that was like the hardest role to cast, was the easiest in a way.
Yeah.
But of course, I then had to cast the other roles, and I had to cast them with people who would bring me the money, even though this is not made for a huge amount of money. But it's a hard subject to get people financially to invest in, and I couldn't have asked for a better team. It's an incredible cast, a dream cast, and Shailene brings this quality of incredible warmth, and you utterly believe that Mohamedou's characters is instantly drawn to her, maybe a little in love with her. And it's a sort of like, she's this young attractive woman, he's this guy who hasn't seen a female for years probably.
That'll do it.
Yeah, that'll do it. And there's something, when I spoke to Mohamedou about the real Terry, he was like, Terry always believed me. She's this good heart. She's this all heart. Nancy, she could be so tough on me. She didn't believe me. And so that was Shailene you could not find a better person to do that. Jodie, obviously, I sent her the script as a kind of joke almost. I thought she's going to definitely turn it down. She doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Really, or she directs, she doesn't act. But I felt like there was something in this role which I remembered seeing in so many of her best parts, which are that she does so well. This characters who are so tough on the outside, so kind of brittle, and yet you also sense this kind of broken quality inside them.
Yeah.
And that's what she does in several of her really great roles. And I thought, that's who Nancy is, and Nancy's not letting anybody in. She's not letting anybody in. She's got something to prove. She's kind of a lonely individual, just obsessed with her work. And I couldn't believe it when Jodie got back to me literally in 3 days. And she said, "Oh, I just saw the title of the email, the Mauritanian." And I thought, what the hell is that? And I then read the script, and I'm hooked. So there's something to be said for obscure titles.
Yeah, right. I mean, listen, that works. It's funny. I think you're right that they're perfectly cast for this. And then once you sort of have them, when I was talking to you, there's, I'm sure for you, the interrogation scene is, for him, he was talking about how real can I make it, and can I go as far as I can without injuring myself, because if it doesn't work, the scene is cheesy. But
exactly.
for you, obviously, you want an intense scene that makes people uncomfortable, but you also don't want to damage your actor. So
I don't damage my actor, and I was very worried about him primarily because he wasn't really eating. He decided that in the 2 weeks really leading up, or 3 weeks, whatever, leading up to those sequences being filmed, that he was going to not eat. He ate like 2 egg whites a day or something crazy.
He said he was exhausted.
And being French, he did continue to have 2 packets of cigarettes and 10 espressos a day. But he wasn't eating. He was getting very weak on set. And I said to him, we need to get a nutritionist. We need to, a nutritionist would come and say to him, you should eat. And he'd be like, no, I'm not. No. And he was so focused on this. And I'm sure he told you all about our arguments over him wearing the real chains and not wearing the real chains. And, there was just, this was an important role to him personally. And he wanted to do everything he could to make it authentic, to make it good. and he knew they had a huge responsibility, I think, on his hands, and that was what he was thinking. But also, you know, we wanted to, when Alvin, the DP, and I, and the designer Michael, we thinking about those scenes a lot. We were, you know, we didn't want to make them so horrible that you can't watch them, that you have to turn off, and yet they need to be incredibly powerful. You need to understand what you go through in order to, you know, why you confess to something you didn't do.
Exactly.
And so, you know, we made this decision to try and make them as subjective as possible, to get inside his head as much as possible, rather than being on the outside looking at a, you know, a body being beaten up or whatever. You actually see very little violence. You know, there's some kicks, some punches, some water poured, moment of waterboarding. Other than that, it's all kind of in his head, and it's all trying to recreate the sense of what it does to you, the disorientation, the surrealism that comes from this kind of treatment. So it sort of makes the audience feel so uncomfortable because it's the psychological torture rather than the physical aspect of it.
For sure, you're not watching martyrs. You're just watching someone suffer, and it really works. And I think the proof is in how angry you feel after the movie. So I know we have to wrap up, but just like
Well,
congratulations on
nice to
being
talk to
able,
you.
yeah, being able to make a movie that leaves you angry and leaves you, you know, wanting to like fix things. And that's not what mainstream entertainment usually does. That's a special achievement.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that it had that effect on you. That's you know, really encouraging to hear.
My pleasure. Thank you. And
Yeah, so
congratulations again.
nice to talk to you.